What he did do under the aegis of his war powers is to seize a mill of United States steel unilaterally. And the reason why he said he had to seize the mill was it was threatened with a strike. The strike could slow or stop the manufacture of steel. The steel was being utilized to make tanks and other armaments of war, and that could then jeopardize our ability to prevail in Korea, and therefore he could just seize the mill. And this famous case got to the United States Supreme Court called Youngstown Sheet and Tube versus Sawyer. And the Supreme Court rebuked Harry Truman. The issue of the constitutionality of the Korean War was not directly addressed, but in a concurring opinion, it was confronted by Justice Robert Jackson. Robert Jackson had been appointed by Roosevelt. He at one time was Attorney General. He actually prosecuted the Nuremberg defendants for genocide and otherwise. He had a leave of absence from the court. So he knew dictatorship when it was authentic. And he writes in his concurring opinion, nothing could be more sinister than for the Supreme Court to ratify a principle that a president unilaterally can take us into war and then crown himself with these undefined powers as to what was an emergency needed for success and triumph. Because we all know wartime is filled with what? Imponderables. That is the definition of war, fog. You could justify virtually anything, saying this might be the last straw that enables us to win. Because we don't know why. Suddenly the enemy surrenders and says, I give up. It's psychological. You don't know when you're getting to that particular point of threshold. And therefore, if you have a war and you can unilaterally decide what powers you need, you can claim virtually any power under the sun. We needed to engage in massacres or firebombings that would psychologically demoralize the enemy and cause them to surrender. What could, you can claim anything. You have to engage in torture, the rack and screw, kidnapping husbands and wives and children. That's necessary to break the back of their morale. And that's why Justice Jackson wrote, nothing could be more sinister than to empower one individual to take us into war and then claim all these ancillary powers. But, like the French Bourbons, the United States in its empire years forgets nothing and learns nothing. And so then we move to the next great war, the Vietnam War, which purportedly was given aegis by the United States Congress in 1964. Gulf of Tonkin resolution in August, on the heels, nothing is quite as abominable as 9/11, but on the heels of a purported torpedo attack on U.S. naval vessels by the North Vietnamese. Torpedo attack that ultimately proved to be phantom. And at the time, our then Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, said, are we sure these torpedo attacks occurred? Even the Navy stationed on the Maddox and the Churchill was suggesting it could be that our intelligence information is faulty because there were storms and climatic changes and maybe we were sending wrong information. But that was given no heed. So President Johnson, based upon this idea that an unprovoked attack on U.S. vessels that occurred by the North, then obtained the authority from Congress to enter war if he wished to. Unprovoked? We were sending our counterterrorism people into the South. We were shelling North Vietnamese territory and islands, and this was said to be an unprovoked attack on the United States. Now, it's like suggesting predator drones really aren't provocative. They're sort of kindly Tea Party introductions, our calling card. Instead of a coach and six, we send you predator drone. So, if you're, again, what is so mischievous is even less the ultimate decision. The lies, the deceit. How can you run a democratic dispensation based upon lies? You can't. You have to be able to trust your government at least to be able to tell you, these are the facts. We can disagree over what we want to do, but I'm not going to lie to you. We're all hanging together, we all hang separately. And that's the earmark of totalitarian systems. Nobody believes what the Chinese Communist government says about Tiananmen Square or anything else. No one believes what Vladimir Putin says about Khodorkovsky or anything, because we know they lie. We're supposed to be different. We chart our own destiny. We may make stumbles, we may make errors, but it's our dignity as individuals. We need to be treated as adults. You tell us the facts. We will then decide as well what we ought to do. But that's, and say it's the earmark of empire that feels they've got to dissemble, they got to deceive you, treat you like you're too dumb to know what to do if we told you the facts. That's an insult. We, the people, are sovereign, not the government. See, that inverts the idea of the conception of the United States. The government is the steward of our liberties. We don't have to justify our right to know. The government has to justify anything it does. But the Vietnam War, again, was just another example of how blithely it is that the government feels complacent with deceiving and misrepresenting facts to the American people. Now, I had, interrupt, with this anecdote. A couple of years ago, I was watching vice presidential debates with, at that time, was Daniel Ellsberg. Now, Ellsberg has acquired a lot of notoriety for a lot of things. Some of them praiseworthy, some of them maybe not. The Pentagon Papers is sort of symbol in United States history. But he recounted to me how when he first came, he'd been working at the Rand Corporation, he first came to work as an assistant in the Defense Department. This was early on in the Kennedy administration. And Robert McNamara was the defense secretary. He was working for an assistant secretary called Daniel McNaughton, who was from my alma mater at Harvard. And so what had happened in the morning was that a United States spy plane had been shot down into China. And Daniel Ellsberg recounted his first task was, Mr. McNamara is going to have a press conference in 15 minutes. We have to make up 8 cover stories and lies as to what the real source of that crash was. Anything but the truth. This is an administration also that proclaimed a right to lie. That's just wrong. Just wrong. But again, it's this spirit, the end justifies the means. The people are too dumb, they don't know how to handle truth. But we go from the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in 1964, again, what I view as an unconstitutional delegation of congressional authority to the president, because Congress didn't decide we want to initiate war against North Vietnam. Just said, Mr. President, you decide what you want to do. We want to run and duck. So if it turns out bad, we can criticize, and if it turns out good, no one will get angry at us. You know, the heights of irresponsibility. The height of irresponsibility. They were given the exclusive responsibility for war or peace precisely because the Founding Fathers wanted them to be held accountable. Tell their constituents why the husband, the wife, or the son or the daughter is dying. And if you can't, we shouldn't be fighting the war. If we do not have the ability to write a Gettysburg Address for those who died, we should not be at war. Those who died at Gettysburg know why they died. Those who died on the battlefields of Vietnam don't. Or those Marines who died in the barracks of Lebanon in 1983, they don't know why they died. Those who are dying in Afghanistan don't know why they're dying. You know, a Democrat, Hamid Karzai, our puppet, you know, we have phantom 1 million votes. It's even more fraudulent than the Iranian election of Ahmadinejad that we utterly detested. I mean, he could turn around, well, Karzai, I didn't invent 1 million votes. He bettered the instruction that I was given. After the Vietnam War debacle, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution that has been much in the news. Much misunderstood, maligned by the Wall Street Journal and others, and John McCain, but much misunderstood, and at least worthy of serious consideration when we consider our current plight. 1973, Congress overwhelmingly passed the law. President Nixon vetoed it because he thought it would constrain unilateral presidential wars, which it would. It's the whole reason why it was passed, and the reason why that Congress has the authority to override presidential vetoes by 2/3 votes, precisely because presidents would seek to protect aggrandized or usurped powers. The override was very, very pronounced, and what it did were 2 main things. First, in Section 2, it identifies 3, and only 3 conditions where the president can utilize the United States Armed Forces. 1, declaration of war. 2, a specific statutory authorization for the use of the military, even if it's short of war. Or 3, responding to an actual attack on the United States. 3 conditions. And then it further provides in Section 5 that if the president is utilizing American forces in conditions of hostility, after 60 days elapses, the president must withdraw those troops and he's given a 30-day window to ensure that they're not exposed to unnecessary hazards. 30-day window withdraw unless Congress specifically authorizes a continuation beyond the 60 days. Now, there's nothing unconstitutional about the War Powers Resolution. Indeed, it's totally consistent with Justice Jackson's concurring opinion in Youngstown Sheehan 2. And it has never been held unconstitutional by any court, lower court, appellate court, U.S. Supreme Court, ever. And it's been around now since 1973. So that's right, if we do my arithmetic very fast, that means it's over 30 years old, approaching its 40th anniversary. Not a single syllable suggesting it is unconstitutional. Then, after the War Powers Resolution passed, presidents began to ignore it with congressional acquiescence. Usurpations in the public. This wasn't like thieving power in the night. This, whether it's President Ford over the Mayaguez incident, President Jimmy Carter claimed, and most people would probably be shocked because he's viewed as a man of great peace. He proclaimed that if there was any curtailment of oil out of the Persian Gulf, he would have unilateral authority and would begin a war. It was a casus belli. It's his 1980 State of the Union message. Congress sits there, shrugs, does nothing. The repeated utilization, when we had the situations in the 1990s, with President William Jefferson Clinton wishing for congressional authorization for war in Bosnia-Herzegovina because of Milosevic and Karadzic and the horrors there. Congress said no. President Clinton said, all right, well then I just will not call it war and use the bombs anyway.